The question of nature versus nurture is a major debate in the field of psychology. The question is often asked in reference to personality traits, disorders, and behaviors, but in the study we're going to talk about today, we'll look at the debate and its relationship to depth perception. Gibson and Waugh conducted a study on depth perception in babies, but not just human babies. They also studied baby turtles, lambs, rats, pigs, and even puppies. The human babies that they studied were aged from 6 to 14 months, based on the logic that at this point they probably had not yet had the opportunity to learn depth perception. Now, the experimenters, in order to test depth perception, had to devise some kind of a situation in which the participants would be able to perceive depth. Now, of course, they couldn't put the babies at the top of an actual cliff, so instead what they did was they built a visual cliff, or something that gave the illusion of having depth. Now, this apparatus that they built was a tall glass table with an even surface, but one side of the table had a checkered pattern placed right underneath the top of the surface, while the other side of the table had the same pattern placed 5 feet lower than the pattern on the shallow side. This created the illusion of depth. There was a shallow side and then it dropped off to a deeper side. So the test subjects were placed on a solid board piece in the middle of the table between the two sides, and the experimenters wanted to see if the infants showed any kind of a hesitation to crawl over to the deep side. This would let them know whether depth perception was innate or learned. 9 of the 36 babies that they tested in the studies refused to move at all, so they just stayed in one place for the duration of the experiment. But out of the 27 that did participate, only 3 were actually willing to crawl over to the deep side. So from these results, the experimenters concluded that in humans, depth perception is in fact innate rather than learned, since the babies were only a few months old. Most of the other baby animals did not show, or actually showed a similar grasp of depth perception and were similarly hesitant to crawl over to the deeper side of the visual cliff. So the only animals that didn't show any noticeable difference were the rats, and experimenters think that this is because rats rely more on their sense of smell than vision. About 25% of the baby turtles went over to the deep side, and in general, Gibson and Waugh were able to conclude from these results that depth perception is in fact innate, since at the time of the experiment the babies were too young to have learned depth perception on their own.